He pointed at me and said, "You're nothing special. A woman like you could never stand beside a man like me." People stared and the shame burned my skin. But then I felt my strength rise. I stood up and said, "Thank you for showing me who you are." And I walked away, leaving his cruelty behind me. He pointed at me and said, "You're nothing special. A woman like you could never stand beside a man like me." The words came out of Aiden's mouth like he'd been rehearsing them, loud and clear across the crowded bistro patio. People stared. The couple at the next table stopped eating. The waiter froze mid-step. The shame burned my skin, started in my chest and spread everywhere until I felt like I was on fire. For 3 years I'd loved this man. Adjusted my entire life around his schedule, his career, his expectations. And now he was pointing at me in front of his colleagues, telling everyone within earshot that I wasn't good enough to be with him. My throat closed. My hands shook. Every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to explain, to make them understand. But then something else rose up, something that had been sleeping inside me for too long. I felt my spine straighten. Felt strength I didn't know I still had. I stood up, looked directly into his eyes and said, "Thank you for showing me who you are." Then I walked away, leaving his cruelty behind me like trash on that sunlit patio. That was 7 months ago. I'm Mia Holloway and this is the story of what happened next. But to understand how I got to that patio, how I ended up with a man who could say those words to me in public, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to who I was before Aiden Carmichael entered my life and made me forget. I'm 31 years old. I do work most people don't even know exists. Architectural restoration and historic preservation. Not the kind you see on home improvement shows where everything gets painted white and called updated. The real thing. The kind where you spend weeks in dusty archives researching original construction methods. Where you crawl through attics in August heat examining timber framing techniques from the 1880s. Where you source materials that haven't been commercially available since before the Great Depression because anything else would compromise a building's historical integrity. I earned my bachelor's in architecture from a state school I could afford with scholarships and restaurant jobs that left me smelling like fryer grease. Then I fought my way into a master's program in architectural history that accepts only 15 students a year out of hundreds of applicants. The application process alone took 6 months. Portfolio reviews, written essays, interviews with preservation specialists who asked questions designed to weed out anyone who wasn't absolutely serious about this work. Those 2 years of graduate school were the hardest and best of my life. Learning construction methods from centuries past. Identifying period-appropriate materials by sight and touch. Understanding why buildings were designed certain ways based on available technology and regional traditions. I spent my summers on restoration sites across New England, learning from craftsmen in their 70s and 80s who dedicated entire lifetimes to preserving techniques that would otherwise die with them. Men who could match any plaster composition by feel. Women who could identify wood species from a single grain pattern. People who understood that some knowledge can't be learned from books. It has to be passed down hand to hand, generation to generation. My mother raised me alone after my father left when I was 6. I have exactly 3 clear memories of him and all of them involve doors closing. The front door of our apartment when he said he was going to the store and didn't come back for 3 weeks. The car door when he picked me up for the last time and returned me 4 hours early because he had plans. The courthouse door after the divorce was finalized and he walked out without looking back. Mom never spoke badly about him, but she didn't have to. His absence said everything. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Cleaned houses during the day for families who had more money than they knew what to do with. Waited tables at night at a diner where the tips were decent if you could handle the businessmen who'd had too much to drink and thought a $20 bill gave them permission to be inappropriate. I'd do homework in the diner's back booth most nights, the smell of coffee and bacon grease permanently embedded in my notebooks. Mom taught me one lesson that sank deeper than anything I learned in school. Never depend on anyone else for your survival. Not a man. Not a boss. Not anyone. She said it while scrubbing someone else's toilet so I could have new school supplies. She said it while counting crumpled bills at our kitchen table after midnight shifts. She said it the day my acceptance letter arrived for the master's program. Good. Now you'll never have to clean anyone's house but your own. And if you choose to clean someone's house, it'll be because you want to, not because you have to. I live in a renovated loft downtown now. 900 square feet of exposed brick walls that I examined too closely, analyzing mortar composition and laying patterns out of professional habit. Original hardwood floors from the 1920s that I researched and refinished myself, matching the original finish as closely as modern materials would allow. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It's not huge, but it's mine. I bought it with money I earned. Decorated it with furniture I chose. Every brick, every floorboard, every decision, mine. I drive a Honda CR-V that I paid off 2 years ahead of schedule by taking extra freelance consultations and living below my means. I have $55,000 in savings and a retirement account I contribute to every single month without fail. My life isn't extravagant by some standards, but it's solid. Built on a foundation I poured myself, brick by brick, decision by decision. People don't understand what I do until they see it. Last year, I led the restoration of an 1890s courthouse that had been slowly falling apart for decades. The building was a disaster when we started. Water damage from a leaking roof, structural issues from settling foundations, original architectural features buried under ill-conceived 1970s renovations that had covered beauty with cheap practicality. I spent 8 months on that project. We uncovered original frescoes hidden under layers of industrial paint. Rebuilt the copper dome using period-appropriate techniques and materials. Restored marble staircases that had been damaged by decades of salt and neglect. The mayor himself thanked me at the Preservation Award ceremony. He stood at a podium in the restored courthouse rotunda and called the work a gift to future generations. He said the building would stand for another 100 years because of the care we'd taken. That project alone generated 6 new contract inquiries from municipalities and historical societies across the state. When I walk into a building that's 130 years old, I don't just see walls and floors. I see stories. The craftsmen who hand-carved decorative molding during long winter months. The families who lived there, their lives marked by scuff marks on baseboards and worn spots on stair treads. The history that deserves to be preserved because once it's destroyed, it's gone forever. No amount of money or regret can bring it back. I specialize in matching original materials down to microscopic details. Wood grain patterns, plaster composition, paint pigments mixed using historical formulas. I source period-appropriate fixtures from architectural salvage yards, estate sales, and sometimes from buildings that are beyond saving. I understand construction methods that modern builders have completely forgotten. Techniques that were standard practice a century ago but have been replaced by faster, cheaper alternatives that lack the same beauty and durability. The Brookline estate I'm working on now is a $2.3 million restoration project. I secured that contract myself after a 3-hour presentation to the owners about my approach to preservation. I manage the entire project. The plasterer who learned his trade from his grandfather in Italy, the woodworker who can replicate any molding profile from a single photograph, the mason who understands how lime mortar behaves differently than modern cement. I deal with the historical commission, navigating their requirements and restrictions. I coordinate with structural engineers and modern building code inspectors. I handle every detail from foundation stabilization to roof restoration. It's complex, demanding work that requires expertise most people will never have. But to certain people like Aidan Carmichael and his family, it was always just playing with old buildings. I met Aidan 3 years ago at a charity gala. One of those black tie events where Boston's professionals network over wine that costs more per bottle than I used to make in a week waiting tables. He was a corporate attorney at one of those massive downtown firms where they bill clients $600 an hour and measure success in billable hours and partnership potential. That night, he seemed genuinely interested when I talked about the historic mansion I was restoring in Cambridge. He asked thoughtful questions about the process. Listened, or seemed to listen, when I explained the challenges of matching materials that were no longer manufactured. He said, "That's fascinating. Most people wouldn't have the patience for that kind of detail work." I thought it was a compliment. I thought he saw my work as valuable. The first year was genuinely good. We'd spend weekends visiting antique shops and architectural salvage yards. I was always hunting for authentic hardware, original light fixtures, decorative elements that could be incorporated into my projects. He seemed to enjoy it, or at least he never complained. We'd attend gallery openings together, events where my colleagues discussed Victorian construction techniques and preservation ethics. He'd hold my hand during dinners where I'd talk about my current projects with an enthusiasm I couldn't contain. He seemed supportive, proud even. He'd introduce me to his friends as my girlfriend, the architect, which wasn't wrong but wasn't quite accurate either. I didn't correct him because architect sounded more impressive than restoration specialist, and I wanted his friends to take me seriously. But looking back now with clear eyes, I can see exactly when things started shifting. The change was subtle at first. Small comments that seemed innocent on the surface. His questions became more pointed. How much does restoration work actually pay compared to new construction? He'd ask while scrolling through his phone. Or, do you ever think about doing something more lucrative with your degree? His colleagues would ask what I did at firm events and he'd answer for me before I could speak. Mia works with old buildings. Kind of like an interior designer but for historic homes. The comparison to interior design was deliberate, I realize now. A way to make my work sound decorative rather than structural. Aesthetic rather than essential. Something women do to make spaces pretty rather than the complex engineering and historical work it actually is. The dismissiveness was always wrapped in a smile, delivered with casual affection, so I told myself I was being oversensitive. Reading into things that weren't there. Making problems out of nothing. Aiden started suggesting I could leverage my degree differently. Get a real estate license and work in luxury property sales. Consult for developers who wanted to convert historic buildings into high-end condos. You could probably double your income if you pivoted into development, he'd say. That word, pivot, like my 12 years of education and experience were just a starting point for something better. Something more legitimate in his worldview. His parents made everything worse. His father is a retired investment banker who made his fortune in private equity. His mother chairs museum boards and historical society committees. The kind of people who appreciate history as long as someone else does the dirty work of actually preserving it. At family dinners, they'd ask about my plans with a tone that made clear they considered my current path temporary. Did I eventually want to teach at a university? Write coffee table books about historical architecture? Surely I wasn't planning to work in construction forever? The way his mother said construction, with that slight pause before the word, that faint curl of distaste, made my jaw clench every single time. Like I spent my days swinging a hammer on new housing developments instead of managing complex projects that required historical knowledge, engineering expertise, and artistic sensitivity. I hold a master's degree. I'm a certified historic preservation specialist. I consult on projects that will outlive everyone in that dining room. But in their eyes, I was just someone playing at a career while waiting to settle into something more appropriate for their son's wife. I started changing my behavior without even realizing it. Downplaying my work when Aiden asked about my day. Mentioning the small problems instead of the exciting breakthroughs. Stopping myself from talking about big contracts or significant discoveries. I stopped inviting him to job sites after he made one too many jokes about me playing in the dirt. I convinced myself his suggestions about career changes were supportive guidance instead of what they really were, contempt dressed up as concern for my future. I told myself he just didn't understand my field. That once I achieved more visible success, major awards, media recognition, the kind of validation he could point to with pride, he'd see my work differently. He'd understand its value. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about so many things. But 7 months ago, sitting on that sunny patio while he pointed at me and announced to everyone watching that I wasn't special enough to stand beside him, something finally broke through the fog of self-doubt he'd carefully cultivated. I saw him clearly for the first time in 3 years. And I walked away. This is what happened after. Aiden called me on a Thursday morning in early June. I was at the Brookline estate, standing in what used to be the library, examining water damage on the original coffered ceiling. My phone rang 3 times before I pulled off my work gloves to answer. Lunch tomorrow, he said without preamble. Bistro Laurent. 1 o'clock. I wiped dust from my forehead with the back of my hand. Tomorrow? Aiden, I've got the historical commission meeting at 2. I can't. Reschedule it. His tone left no room for negotiation. This is important. I need you to meet some people from the firm properly. 2 senior partners and their wives. It'll be good for you to make connections. Good for me. As if my career depended on impressing his colleagues rather than the quality of my work. But I heard something else in his voice. Urgency maybe. Or expectation. Like this lunch mattered to him in ways he wasn't explaining. "Hey," I said. "I'll move the meeting. Wear something nice. Not your work clothes." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there in that damaged library, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling something shift in my chest. Not your work clothes. Like showing up covered in plaster dust from a job site was something shameful instead of evidence of actual work being done. Friday arrived hot and bright. I wore my navy dress, the one I save for award ceremonies and important client meetings. Spent 20 minutes on my hair and makeup, trying to look polished enough to meet Aiden's standards. The dress felt wrong, too formal for lunch, too much effort for something that should have been casual. But I wanted to make a good impression. Wanted his colleagues to see me as someone who belonged in Aiden's world. I arrived at Bistro Laurent 5 minutes early. The restaurant was one of those places where everything costs twice what it should and the portions are deliberately small. Upscale French cuisine served on oversized plates. The kind of place where Aiden's firm held client meetings and billed the meals to expense accounts. The hostess led me to the patio, where the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on white tablecloths and crystal water glasses. Aiden was already seated at a center table with 4 other people. 2 older men in expensive suits. 2 women in designer dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everyone turned to look as I approached. Mia finally. Aiden stood, kissed my cheek with the cold formality of a business greeting. "Everyone, this is my girlfriend, Mia Holloway." He gestured around the table. "This is Richard Patterson and his wife Margaret. And Thomas Brennan with his wife Claire. Richard and Thomas are senior partners at the firm." I shook hands with everyone, murmuring polite greetings. Margaret had kind eyes and a warm smile. Claire looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The men assessed me with the casual evaluation that successful people give to those they're not sure matter yet. We sat. A waiter appeared instantly with menus and a wine list that Aiden ordered from without consulting anyone. The conversation started easily. Summer vacation plans, recent cases at the firm, the usual social lubrication that happens when strangers try to find common ground. I mostly listened. Sipped water. Smiled at appropriate moments. Tried to appear interested when Thomas talked about a murder case that had consumed the last 6 months of his life. The food arrived. Small, artfully arranged portions that looked better than they tasted. Then Margaret turned to me with genuine curiosity. "So Mia, what do you do?" The table went quiet. All eyes turned toward me. I'd been through this conversation 100 times at Aiden's work events. Had learned to keep my answer simple and digestible for people who wouldn't understand the complexities. "I specialize in historic building restoration," I said. "Currently working on an 1880s estate in Brookline." Margaret's face lit up. "Oh, how wonderful. My grandmother's house is Victorian, beautiful woodwork, but it's falling apart. The trim is all damaged and we can't find anyone who knows how to repair it properly. Do you work with residential clients?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Aiden cut in before I could speak. "Mia's more of a hobbyist," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "She does small restoration projects, but it's not really a full-time career path. We've been discussing her transitioning into something with more growth potential." The table went quiet. Different kind of quiet this time. Uncomfortable. Heat flooded my face. I felt my hands clench in my lap under the table. "Actually," I said, voice tight, "I run major restoration projects. The Brookline estate is a $2.3 million renovation. I'm the lead architect." Aiden laughed. That condescending chuckle that always made my stomach twist. That sound that said he found my words amusing in the way you'd find a child's exaggeration amusing. "Mia, you're part of a team. Let's not exaggerate your role." The shame was instant and overwhelming. He just told his colleagues, senior partners whose respect he desperately wanted, that I was lying about my professional accomplishments. Made me sound like I was inflating my importance, pretending to be more than I was. "I am the project lead. I secured the contract after a 3-hour presentation. I manage the craftsmen, coordinate with the historical commission, handle every aspect from structural assessment to final inspections. My name is on the contract. My expertise made the project possible." But contradicting him more forcefully felt impossible. We were surrounded by his professional circle, people whose opinions mattered to his career advancement. I could feel their discomfort, their uncertainty about whether to believe him or me. Richard cleared his throat. Claire studied her wine glass. Margaret looked between Aidan and me with something that might have been pity. Then the man at the end of the table, someone I hadn't really noticed until that moment, spoke up. Historic preservation is fascinating work, he said. His voice was calm, measured. Requires serious expertise. The kind of specialized knowledge most people don't have. Aidan's jaw tightened. He didn't like being contradicted, especially not in front of the senior partners. Marcus, you don't understand the field, Aidan said. His voice had taken on that courtroom authority he used when making closing arguments. It's not as complex as you're imagining. That's when everything accelerated. Aidan leaned forward. His eyes locked on mine with an expression I'd never seen before, contempt mixed with something darker. His hand came up, finger extended, pointing directly at my chest like I was evidence being presented to a jury. Let's be honest, he said. His voice carried across the patio, loud enough that conversations at nearby tables stuttered to silence. You're nothing special, Mia. A woman like you could never stand beside a man like me. You work with dusty old buildings because you don't have the ambition for real success. You're content with small-time projects and pretending they matter. The entire patio went silent. That horrible, thick silence where everyone stops pretending they're not listening and just openly stares. I could feel every eye on us. The couple at the next table had stopped eating mid-bite. A waiter stood frozen 3 feet away, water pitcher raised. Margaret's mouth had fallen open in shock. Even Richard and Thomas, men who'd probably witnessed countless uncomfortable moments in their careers, looked genuinely disturbed. The shame was physical. It started in my chest and erupted outward, spreading through my entire body like fire. My face burned. My throat closed. My hands trembled in my lap. 3 years of my life. 3 years of adjusting my schedule around his cases, attending his firm events, meeting his family for strained dinners where they asked when I'd get a real career. 3 years of slowly making myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious in my own eyes because nothing I did ever seemed good enough for him. And this was what I'd been to him all along, not special enough. Not ambitious enough. Someone whose work didn't matter. Someone who could never stand beside him because I wasn't worthy of that position. But underneath the shame, something else was rising. Something I'd been suppressing for months, maybe years. Something fierce and unbreakable that I'd forgotten existed. Fury. Clarity. Strength. I felt my spine straighten. Felt my hands stop shaking. Felt that part of me that had survived my father leaving, that had worked 2 jobs to put myself through college, that had built a career in a field requiring precision and resilience. Felt all of that come flooding back. I stood up slowly. Every movement deliberate and controlled. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. Looked directly into Aidan's smug, self-satisfied face. The face of a man who'd just publicly destroyed his girlfriend and felt justified doing it. Thank you for showing me who you are, I said. My voice was calm, steady, clear enough that every person on that patio heard every word. Then I walked away. Left my napkin on the table. Left the untouched entree that probably cost $60. Left Aidan sitting there with his finger still pointed at empty air. Left his colleagues' shocked expressions and the staring strangers and the frozen waiter behind. I walked through the restaurant, past tables where people were openly watching, through the heavy glass door onto the sidewalk into the brutal afternoon sunshine. My hands started shaking again the second I was alone. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall where anyone could see. But I'd done it. I'd walked away from his cruelty, from his contempt, from the slow, suffocating death of becoming someone small enough to fit into his world. I made it to my car in the parking garage. Sat in the driver's seat with the door closed and the engine off. Gripped the steering wheel with both hands and tried to process what had just happened. 3 years. I'd given him 3 years and this was what I'd been to him all along. Not special enough. Not ambitious enough. Not enough. My phone buzzed in my purse. Then buzzed again. And again. I pulled it out. 3 missed calls from Aidan. A text message notification on the screen. I stared at his name for a long moment. Then I declined the incoming 4th call, started the car and drove home. The tears came then. Hot and angry and mixed with something I couldn't quite name. But underneath them, beneath the humiliation and hurt, was something new. Relief. Like I'd been slowly suffocating for 3 years and someone had finally opened a window. I drove straight to my loft without thinking about the route. My hands operated on autopilot, turn signals, lane changes, parking. I don't remember any of it. Just the feeling of my chest constricting tighter with every block, the pressure building behind my eyes, the way my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. Inside my apartment, I dropped my purse on the floor by the door and collapsed onto the couch. The leather was cool against my bare arms. I stared at the exposed brick wall across from me, the one I'd spent hours examining when I first bought this place, analyzing the mortar composition and admiring the craftsmanship from the 1920s. Right now it was just a wall. Just bricks. Nothing more. My phone buzzed in my purse. Then buzzed again. I ignored it. Pulled my knees up to my chest. Pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. Tried to breathe through the tightness in my throat. The buzzing didn't stop. Finally, I grabbed my purse and pulled out my phone. 7 missed calls. All from Aiden. And texts. So many texts. The first one had come through 4 minutes after I'd left the restaurant. Mia, that was inappropriate. You embarrassed me in front of my colleagues. I stared at the words until they blurred. I'd embarrassed him. He just pointed at me in front of a crowded restaurant and told everyone within earshot that I wasn't special enough, that my work didn't matter, that I could never stand beside him. And somehow in his mind I was the one who'd done something wrong. More texts loaded as I scrolled. We need to talk about your reaction. Walking out like that was childish and unprofessional. You're being dramatic. I was making a point about career trajectory. You took it personally. Those people are important to my career. Do you understand what you just did? Each message made the anger build. He wasn't apologizing. Wasn't acknowledging what he'd said or how he'd said it. He was reframing the entire incident as my overreaction, my failure to handle constructive criticism, my inability to behave appropriately in professional settings. The texts kept coming as the afternoon wore into evening. My mother is asking what happened. What am I supposed to tell her? Richard called me. Asked if everything was okay. This is exactly the kind of drama I don't need right now. You need to think about what message you're sending by acting this way. Then around 7 o'clock. Fine. Ignore me. But you're proving my point about maturity. I sat there on my couch, phone in hand, reading and rereading his messages. Trying to find even a hint of remorse or self-awareness. There was none. Just blame. Just criticism of my response to his cruelty. I blocked his number. Didn't write a reply. Didn't send a final message. Just opened his contact information and hit block. Watched his name disappear from my screen. It felt like cutting a rope that had been slowly strangling me for 3 years. The apartment was too quiet after that. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Traffic noise from the street below. My own breathing still uneven and shallow. I needed to talk to someone who'd understand. Jordan answered on the second ring. Please tell me you finally left that pompous jerk. Despite everything, I almost laughed. How did you? You've been miserable for a year, Mia. Every time you talked about him, you sounded like you were apologizing for existing. What happened? So I told her. Everything. The lunch invitation that felt mandatory. The navy dress I'd worn to impress people who didn't matter. Margaret's innocent question about my work. Aiden cutting me off, calling me a hobbyist, dismissing my $2.3 million project as if it were a weekend craft. His condescending laugh when I tried to correct him. And then the pointing. The words. The silence that followed. Jordan was quiet while I talked. Didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said flatly, Good. Good. Good that you walked out. Good that it's over. Mia, he's been undermining you for years. Every single time we talked, you'd mention something he said, some comment about your work, some suggestion that you should be doing something else, and you'd brush it off like it didn't matter. But it did matter. It was killing you slowly. Had I been that obvious? I'd thought I was handling it well. Thought I was being mature by not making a big deal out of his little comments. You started downplaying your own projects, Jordan continued. Remember when you got the courthouse contract? You called me so excited. But when I asked how Aiden reacted, you went quiet. Said he was proud but thought you should consider teaching instead because it was more stable. Like teaching was a step up from leading a historic restoration that would last 100 years. I did remember that. I'd convinced myself Aiden was just being practical. Looking out for my long-term career stability. I wasted 3 years, I said. My voice cracked on the last word. No. Jordan's voice turned sharp. You didn't waste anything. You learned what you won't tolerate. You learned what it feels like when someone doesn't value you. That's not wasted time, Mia. That's education. Expensive education maybe, but education. We talked for another hour. She told me about the preservation projects her firm was handling. Asked detailed questions about the Brookline estate that reminded me why I loved this work. Made me laugh with a story about a contractor who'd tried to use modern drywall in a 1880s mansion and couldn't understand why the Historical Commission rejected his permit. By the time we hung up, the tightness in my chest had eased slightly. 2 days passed in a blur of work. I threw myself into the Brookline project, staying on site from dawn until long after the craftsmen had gone home. I didn't want to think. Didn't want to process. Just wanted to focus on wood grain patterns and plaster composition and problems that had clear solutions. Sunday afternoon my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Mom had met Aiden several times over the last 3 years. She'd never said she liked him exactly, but she'd seemed to approve of the stability he represented. The idea that I was with someone who had a solid career and came from a good family. I heard what happened, she said the second I answered. No greeting. No preamble. My stomach dropped. Who told you? Aiden's mother called one of the women I used to work for. They sit on some committee together. Word travels. She paused. Good for you for walking away. I almost dropped the phone. What? You heard me. If he talked to you that way in public, he's been talking to you that way in private for a long time. I raised you better than to accept that. Mom, I thought you liked him. You said he was stable. That he came from a good family. I said those things because you seemed happy. Or I thought you did. But the last few times we talked you sounded different. Smaller. Like you were trying to take up less space. Her voice softened slightly. I raised you to never depend on a man for your survival. That includes depending on a man to tell you your worth. If he couldn't see what you've built, he wasn't looking. And if he humiliated you in public, he doesn't deserve you in private. My throat tightened. Mom wasn't sentimental. She didn't do emotional heart-to-hearts or lengthy discussions about feelings. She was practical. Direct. The fact that she was saying this at all meant she'd been worried. Now stop crying and get back to work, she said. You've got buildings to save. That's what matters. It was the most loving thing she'd said to me in years. The following Tuesday, a week after the restaurant incident, I got a LinkedIn message from Margaret Patterson. I almost deleted it without reading. Didn't want any connection to Aiden's world, but curiosity won. Mia, I owe you an apology. I should have said something at that lunch. Should have called Aiden out for how he spoke to you. I was shocked and I froze and I'm sorry. I stared at the message. Started to close it. Then saw there was more. I wanted you to know what happened after you left. Marcus, the surgeon who was at the table, tore into Aiden the second you were gone. Called him unprofessional and disrespectful. Said what he'd done was unacceptable regardless of personal relationship issues. Richard and Thomas pulled Aiden aside before we even left the restaurant. Had what Thomas called a serious conversation about appropriate conduct. There are whispers that the incident has damaged Aiden's standing at the firm. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. Marcus also asked for your contact information. He's not actually a partner at the firm. He's a trauma surgeon interviewing us to handle a medical malpractice case. He said he wanted to apologize for not intervening more forcefully. I gave him your email. I hope that's okay. I sat back in my office chair. Stared at the screen. Someone had stood up for me. After I'd left. After I couldn't defend myself. Someone had called out Aiden's behavior and faced professional consequences for it. I didn't respond to Margaret's message. Didn't know what to say. But I saved it. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Jordan's words. About my mother's unexpected support. About Margaret's message and the fact that not everyone had been comfortable with what happened. Maybe I hadn't been as alone as I'd felt in that moment on the patio. Maybe walking away had been exactly the right thing to do. Monday morning I woke up before my alarm. The sun hadn't risen yet. The loft was dark and quiet except for the distant hum of early traffic. I lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling and made a decision. I was done thinking about Aiden. Done replaying that lunch. Done giving him space in my head. I got up, made coffee and drove to the Brookline estate before 6 in the morning. The house was quiet when I arrived. No craftsmen yet. No noise except the old floorboards creaking under my feet as I walked through the first floor. I stood in the ballroom, the largest room in the house with floor-to-ceiling windows that faced east. Morning light was just starting to filter through the dusty glass. We were in the middle of restoring the original parquet flooring. The pattern was complex, alternating wood species arranged in geometric designs that required matching not just the type of wood, but the age, the grain direction, the finish. Sections had been damaged by water over the decades. Others had been covered with cheap laminate in the 1980s that we'd painstakingly removed. I knelt down on the subflooring, pulled out my notebook and started sketching the pattern we'd need to replicate for the damaged southeast corner. The physical focus helped. When I was thinking about wood grain and historical accuracy, I wasn't thinking about anything else. The craftsmen started arriving around 7. Miguel, the woodworker who'd been doing this for 40 years. His son Carlos, who was learning the trade. An older man named Frank who specialized in historic floor restoration and had hands that could identify wood species by touch alone. We worked in near silence for hours. The rhythm of it was meditative, measuring, cutting, fitting each piece like a puzzle that had been scattered across time. Miguel would hold up a piece of oak, examine it under the light, then either approve it or set it aside. His standards were impossibly high. That's why I'd hired him. Around noon, Elizabeth Chin stopped by. She did this most days. Brought lunch, checked on progress, asked thoughtful questions about the work. Today she brought sandwiches from a deli downtown and bottles of cold lemonade. We sat on the front porch, the 5 of us, eating in the shade. "This is remarkable work," Elizabeth said, watching Miguel examine a piece of walnut he'd just cut. "Most people wouldn't take this kind of care. Most people don't care about preserving the original integrity," I said. "They just want it to look nice in photos." Elizabeth smiled. "That's why we hired you. You understand the difference." She paused, sipping her lemonade. "My sister mentioned you to someone on the Historical Preservation Trust board. I hope that's okay. They've been looking for an architect to lead a major project." I remembered Margaret's LinkedIn message mentioning something about connections. "What kind of project?" "The Whitmore Mansion. Do you know it?" I nearly choked on my sandwich. Everyone in preservation circles knew the Whitmore Mansion. It was a massive 1870s Italianate estate that had been slowly deteriorating for decades. Previous restoration attempts had failed due to lack of funding or expertise. It was the kind of project architects dreamed about: complex, challenging, historically significant. "They're serious about restoring it this time," Elizabeth continued. "Apparently they finally secured enough funding. They asked if I knew anyone qualified to lead the project." She looked at me. "I gave them your name." 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room at the Historical Preservation Trust's offices, presenting my approach to the Whitmore Mansion restoration. 6 board members sat across from me. The director, a woman named Patricia Whitman who'd been in preservation for 30 years. 2 architects, a structural engineer, a historian, and Elizabeth's sister whose name turned out to be Catherine. I'd prepared for 3 days. Put together a presentation that outlined every phase of the project. Initial structural assessment, historical research into original materials and methods, contractor selection, timeline, budget allocation, coordination with modern building codes while maintaining historical integrity. Patricia asked hard questions. The structural engineer challenged some of my load-bearing assumptions. The historian wanted to know how I'd verify the authenticity of replacement materials. I answered everything. Showed them documentation from similar projects I'd completed. Explained my relationships with specialized craftsmen and material suppliers. Demonstrated that I understood the complexity and had the expertise to manage it. At the end, Patricia looked at the other board members, then back at me. "When can you start?" I signed the contract that afternoon. $4.5 million budget. 2-year timeline. Full authority as lead restoration architect. Sitting in my car afterward, I stared at the signed papers on the passenger seat. This was the kind of project Aidan had always dismissed as small time. The kind of work he'd suggested I abandon for something with more growth potential. I thought about his words on that patio. "You work with dusty old buildings because you don't have the ambition for real success." Then I started the car and drove back to the Brookline estate. I had work to do. But the work couldn't erase everything. The nightmares started about 3 weeks after the restaurant incident. Always variations on the same theme. I'd be back on that patio, frozen in my chair while Aiden pointed at me. His words would echo, getting louder each time. Not special. Could never stand beside me. No ambition. Everyone would be staring. Not just the people at the table but crowds of strangers, all watching me shrink smaller and smaller until I disappeared. Sometimes the dream shifted locations. I'd be presenting the Whitmore project to the trust board, and Aiden would walk in mid-presentation. He'd interrupt, tell them I was exaggerating my qualifications, that I wasn't really capable of leading a project this size. And they'd believe him. They'd tear up the contract while I stood there unable to speak. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, reaching for my phone to make sure he hadn't somehow contacted me. Jordan noticed during one of our weekly video calls. We'd been talking about the Whitmore contract and I'd lost my train of thought mid-sentence. "You look exhausted," she said. "I'm fine. Just busy with both projects." "Mia." Her voice went serious. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" I couldn't remember. "I'm dealing with it." "Are you? Or are you just working yourself into the ground so you don't have to think about what happened?" I didn't answer. Jordan sighed. "Healing isn't linear. You walked away from him physically, that took courage. But now you have to do the harder work of walking away from him emotionally. That takes time. And it's okay if you're not there yet." He was right. I knew she was right. But knowing didn't make the nightmares stop. A month after the restaurant incident, Rachel Donnelly called me. She was part of Aiden's social circle, someone I'd spent time with at various events over the years. We weren't close, but we'd always been friendly enough. "Can we meet for coffee?" she asked. "I want to talk to you about something." I almost said no. Didn't want any connection to Aiden's world. But curiosity and maybe some residual sense of social obligation made me agree. We met at a cafe 3 blocks from my loft. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 lattes. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I know things have been complicated. That's one word for it." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I heard what happened at Bistro Laurent. Several people did. And I wanted you to know that a lot of us think Aiden was completely out of line." I waited. There was definitely a but coming. "But," Rachel continued, leaning forward slightly, "you have to understand the pressure he's under right now. He's up for junior partner at the firm. His parents have these enormous expectations. He's been incredibly stressed for months. I think that day at lunch he just snapped. Said things he didn't mean." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "So I should excuse public humiliation because he was stressed?" "I'm not saying it was okay. I'm just saying there's context. And maybe if you'd been more understanding about his career needs, more supportive during this difficult time, he wouldn't have reacted that way." The implication hung in the air between us. That I'd somehow contributed to my own humiliation. That my lack of understanding had pushed him to say those things. I stood up, pulled a $5 bill from my wallet and left it on the table. "Where are you going?" Rachel looked genuinely confused. Away from someone who thinks I deserved what happened because I wasn't supportive enough of a man who spent 3 years undermining my career. I walked out. Second time in a month I'd left a conversation mid-sentence. This time I felt nothing but clarity. Anyone who excused cruelty wasn't actually a friend. Anyone who suggested I'd provoked my own humiliation by not being understanding enough had revealed exactly where their loyalty lay. I deleted Rachel's number from my phone before I reached my car. That evening I sat in my loft with takeout I didn't really want to eat, thinking about the last month. The nightmares that wouldn't stop. The so-called friend who'd blamed me for Aiden's behavior. The exhaustion that came from working 12-hour days to avoid thinking about anything else. But also, the Whitmore contract sitting on my desk. Elizabeth's respect. Jordan's unwavering support. My mother's unexpected validation. The craftsman who trusted my expertise without question. I was rebuilding. The ground was still shaking. I wasn't healed yet. But I was standing. And that was something. 3 months after the restaurant incident, I was standing in the produce section of Whole Foods, examining tomatoes and mentally calculating whether I had time to make dinner or if I'd be eating takeout again, when I heard a voice that made my entire body tense. "Mia." I looked up. Aiden's mother stood 10 feet away, perfectly dressed in cream linen and pearls despite the summer heat. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were cold. I saw her before she'd fully approached. Every instinct screamed at me to put down the tomatoes and leave. Just walk away. But years of social conditioning, of being polite, of not making scenes, of respecting elders even when they didn't respect you, made my feet stay planted. Mrs. Carmichael, I said. Kept my voice level. She moved closer, positioning herself so I couldn't easily escape without being obviously rude. We need to talk. I don't think we do. Aiden has been devastated since you ended things. She said it like a fact. Like I'd done something to him instead of walking away from someone who'd publicly humiliated me. Whatever he said at that lunch, I'm sure it was taken out of context. He speaks highly of you, you know. Always has. The audacity of it stole my breath for a moment. He made a mistake, she continued. And you're being unforgiving. That's not attractive in a woman your age. My age. As if turning 31 made me desperate enough to accept cruelty. He humiliated me in public, I said quietly. A woman pushing a cart past us glanced over and I lowered my voice further. He pointed at me in front of his colleagues and told everyone I wasn't special enough to stand beside him. That's not something that was taken out of context, Mrs. Carmichael. Those were his exact words. She waved a hand dismissively. Aiden has always been passionate. Sometimes that comes across as harsh to people who don't understand him. But he's a good man from a good family. And frankly, Mia, you're not getting any younger. Women in your position don't have the luxury of being prideful. In your position. The words hung between us. Not wealthy enough. Not connected enough. Not from the right family. Not enough. I set down the tomatoes very carefully. Looked at this woman who'd spent 3 years making subtle comments about my career, my background, my unsuitability for her son. Who was now standing in a grocery store telling me I should be grateful for public humiliation because time was running out for women like me. You're absolutely right, I said. A small smile touched my lips. I don't have the luxury of settling for a man who doesn't respect me. I don't have the luxury of accepting treatment like that just because he comes from a good family. Thank God I figured that out. Then I walked away. Left her standing there in the produce section. Left my half-full cart by the tomatoes. Walked straight out of the store into the parking lot, got in my car and drove home. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. But this time it was anger, not shame. 2 weeks later, the Boston Globe ran a feature article about the Whitmore Mansion restoration. I almost missed it. Sunday morning I was at a coffee shop near my loft, reading through project notes on my tablet when my phone started buzzing. Text from Jordan, check the Globe. Lifestyle section. Now. I pulled up the digital edition. There it was, a full-page spread with photos of the Whitmore Mansion's exterior and interior progress shots. The headline read, Preserving the Past, How One Architect is Setting New Standards in Historic Restoration. The article was detailed. They'd interviewed me for 2 hours the previous month, and the journalist had actually done her research. She wrote about my approach to matching original materials, about the complexity of coordinating historical accuracy with modern building codes, about the specialized craftsmen I'd assembled. She called my work innovative and meticulous. Quoted Patricia Whitman from the Historical Preservation Trust saying I was exactly the kind of expert the field needs. My phone exploded after that. Emails flooded my inbox. Historical societies from 3 different states asking about consultations. Architects wanting to discuss collaboration. A museum in Connecticut inquiring about a restoration project for their 1850s building. The Historical Preservation Trust's director called me directly, saying the article had generated more interest in their work than anything in the past 5 years. Then around noon a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. Mia, I saw the article in the Globe. That's impressive. Really impressive. I stared at the message. Didn't need to ask who it was. I knew. Aiden. He'd gotten a new number somehow. Reached out after 3 months of silence. After I'd blocked him. After everything. I should have blocked this number immediately. Should have deleted the message without reading it. Instead, I watched as more messages came through over the next few minutes. I've been thinking about what happened at that lunch. I was under a lot of stress. Said things I didn't mean. Can we talk? Then, I made a mistake. You're clearly more ambitious than I gave you credit for. We should discuss giving things another chance. Finally, you've really made something of yourself. I always knew you had potential. We could be good together now that you're at this level professionally. I read each message twice. Let the words sink in completely. He wasn't apologizing. Not really. He was recalibrating. Adjusting his assessment of my worth because my success was now visible in ways he could understand and respect. A Boston Globe article meant more to him than 12 years of expertise. Media recognition was more valuable than state preservation awards or the actual quality of my work. He only valued me now because other people were validating me in ways that fit his narrow definition of success. Not because my work had changed, it hadn't. The Whitmore project was the same kind of complex restoration I'd been doing for years. But now it had press coverage. Now it came with the kind of recognition that impressed people at dinner parties. Now I was acceptable. I blocked the new number. Didn't respond. Just blocked it and set my phone face down on the table. This time I felt only contempt. No hurt. No confusion. Just cold, clear understanding of exactly who he was and what he valued. 3 days later, I was in Rhode Island for a historic preservation conference. It was annual. Architects, historians, and preservationists from across New England gathering to present projects and discuss methodologies. I'd been attending for years, but this was my first time presenting. The Whitmore project had earned me that platform. I was nervous that morning. Spent an hour reviewing my presentation notes in the hotel room, triple-checking the images and technical details. This wasn't just about showcasing the work. It was about establishing credibility with peers whose respect I actually valued. The presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock. The room held about 100 people. I recognized several faces. Architects I'd worked with, historians I'd consulted, preservationists whose work I'd studied. I walked through the entire project. The initial structural assessment and the problems we'd discovered. The historical research that had guided our material choices. The specialized techniques we were using to stabilize the foundation while preserving original stonework. The challenges of meeting modern building codes without compromising historical integrity. Questions came after. Hard ones. Technical ones. People who knew their field asking about load calculations and material sourcing and timeline management. I answered every single one. When it ended, the applause felt genuine. Not polite conference applause. Real acknowledgement of solid work presented well. The reception afterward was in an adjoining room. Wine and cheese, the standard conference networking setup. I was talking with a historian from Vermont about plaster composition when a voice spoke behind me. That was an incredible presentation. I turned. Recognized him immediately even though I'd only seen him once months ago at a table on a restaurant patio. Marcus. The surgeon who'd been at that disastrous lunch. He smiled, but there was something apologetic in his expression. I owe you an explanation and an apology. You don't owe me anything, I said carefully. You weren't the problem that day. No, but I didn't do enough to stop it either. And I've been thinking about that for 3 months. He paused. I wasn't actually a partner at Aiden's firm. I'm a trauma surgeon at Mass General. I was interviewing them to handle a medical malpractice case. When Aiden said those things to you, I called him out after you left. Told him he was out of line. He claimed you were being overly sensitive, that you'd misunderstood his point. I remembered Margaret's LinkedIn message mentioning this. I heard. I wanted to contact you afterward. Asked Margaret for your information. But I wasn't sure if reaching out would be welcome or just another unwanted reminder of a terrible day. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. I came to this conference partly because I'm renovating a Victorian brownstone and needed to learn more about proper restoration techniques. But also because I saw your name on the presenter list and wanted to apologize properly. I studied him. Tall, probably late 30s, with kind eyes and the careful posture of someone who spent long hours in surgery. His apology felt genuine. Not the performative kind that's really about making the apologizer feel better. The apology is appreciated, I said. But you didn't say those things. You don't need to apologize for someone else's cruelty. No. But I could have done more in the moment. Should have. He paused. Your presentation was remarkable, by the way. The level of detail in your material analysis, the way you're balancing preservation with structural safety, that's exactly the kind of approach I need for my brownstone project. We talked for 20 minutes. About his renovation challenges. About the differences between medical precision and architectural precision. About the satisfaction of restoring something broken back to functionality. When the reception ended, he handed me his card. "If you ever have time to consult on a residential project, I'd value your expertise. And if you'd like to get coffee sometime, professionally or otherwise, I'd enjoy continuing this conversation." I took the card. Looked at it. Marcus Reeves, MD, trauma surgery. "I'll think about it," I said. He smiled. "That's more than I expected. Thank you for your time, Mia." I watched him walk away, then looked down at the card in my hand. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure what yet. But standing in that conference hall, surrounded by people who respected my work, holding a business card from someone who'd seen me at my lowest and still thought I was worth knowing, something felt different. The past was trying to stay buried. But maybe the future was finally starting to look like something I could build. I kept Marcus's card on my desk for 3 days before I did anything with it. Just sat there, tucked under the corner of my laptop, while I worked through project schedules and contractor coordination. Every time I opened my computer, I saw it. Marcus Reeves, MD, trauma surgery. His cell phone number written in small print at the bottom. On the 4th day, he called me first. "I hope this isn't overstepping," he said when I answered. "But I'm standing in my brownstone looking at what I'm pretty sure is original plaster under 6 layers of paint, and I have no idea what to do with it." I smiled despite myself. "Don't sand it." "Noted. Can I hire you for a consultation? Actual paid consultation, not just grabbing your expertise for free over coffee." We met at his brownstone that Saturday. It was in the South End, one of those narrow Victorian buildings that lined the tree-covered streets. Beautiful bones. But the previous owner had done unfortunate updates in the 1990s. Dropped ceilings covering original crown molding, laminate flooring over hardwood, modern light fixtures that clashed with the architectural style. Marcus met me at the door in jeans and a faded MIT t-shirt, looking nothing like the man in the suit at the conference. "Thank you for coming. I know your schedule is insane right now." We walked through the space together. I pointed out where original features had been covered or removed, explained what could be restored and what would need to be carefully replicated. He followed behind me with a notebook, taking actual notes, asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand. "You see things no one else sees," he said as we stood in what used to be the library. I just explained how the bookcases had originally been built in, judging from the wall marks and floor impressions. "I just know what to look for. Anyone with training could do this." "That's not true." He gestured around the room. "I walked through this house a dozen times before buying it. Thought I'd noticed everything. But you found details in 20 minutes that I completely missed. That's expertise, not just training." Something about the way he said it, straightforward, matter-of-fact, with genuine respect, made my chest tighten. After we finished the walkthrough, Marcus asked if I wanted to grab dinner. Just to say thank you for the consultation. There's a good Italian place 2 blocks away. I should have said no. I wasn't looking for complications. Wasn't ready for anything beyond work and rebuilding. But something made me say yes anyway. The restaurant was small, warm, the kind of neighborhood place with red checkered tablecloths and photos of Italy covering the walls. We sat by the window, ordered pasta and wine, and talked. Marcus told me about his work at Mass General. The satisfaction of putting broken bodies back together. The frustration of losing patients despite doing everything technically correct. "Sometimes the damage is too extensive," he said quietly. "Sometimes people come to us too late, and there's nothing we can do but make them comfortable." I understood that in a way I hadn't expected to. Some buildings are like that too. Too far gone structurally. You want to save them, but sometimes the kindest thing is to document what existed and let them go. He looked at me across the table. "That must be hard. Knowing when to stop fighting." "The hardest part of the job." We talked about his family. His sister, the aerospace engineer who designed components for satellites. His brother, who restored vintage motorcycles in his garage and sold them to collectors. His parents, both retired teachers, who'd raised their kids to respect mastery in any form. "They never cared what we did professionally," Marcus said. "They cared that we did it well. My dad used to say the world needs excellent plumbers as much as it needs excellent doctors. Maybe more, since you can live without surgery but you can't live without working toilets." I laughed. Really laughed for the first time in months. The idea that some careers are inherently superior to others never made sense to me, he continued. "You've spent 12 years becoming an expert in something most people don't even know exists. that deserves the same respect as any other expertise. Something in my chest loosened. For 3 years I'd absorbed Aiden's subtle message that my work was lesser, that I should be doing something more impressive, that architectural restoration was a hobby I should outgrow. Marcus saw it completely differently. Expertise was expertise regardless of the field or how much social prestige it carried. When he walked me to my car after dinner, he stopped on the sidewalk. "I'd like to see you again." "Not for professional reasons." I hesitated. He noticed immediately. "Too soon?" he asked gently. "Maybe," I said honestly. "I don't know where I am yet. With everything." He nodded. "Fair enough. But I'm patient. And I think you're worth waiting for." He didn't push. Didn't try to convince me or make arguments about why I should give him a chance. Just accepted what I said and stepped back. That restraint meant more than any persuasion could have. The Whitmore Mansion restoration accelerated over the next 2 months. Every decision I made was documented, photographed, submitted to architectural journals for publication. The project had become a case study, a model for how to approach large-scale historic restoration without compromising integrity. We'd restored the original frescoes in the dining room using period-appropriate pigments mixed according to 19th-century formulas. Rebuilt the conservatory with hand-blown glass sourced from one of the last manufacturers who still used traditional methods. Stabilized the foundation using modern engineering while preserving every piece of original stonework. Local news covered our progress. The Historical Preservation Trust started using the project in their educational materials. I gave 3 interviews in as many weeks, 2 for preservation journals, 1 for a local magazine doing a feature on women in traditionally male-dominated fields. My phone didn't stop ringing. Historic estates needed assessment. Theaters needed restoration architects. Churches, museums, private collectors with Victorian homes. Everyone wanted the architect who'd brought the Whitmore Mansion back to life. I realized I couldn't handle it alone anymore. Not if I wanted to maintain quality. So I formalized the business. Holloway Restoration Architecture. Hired 3 junior architects I'd mentored over the years. Talented people who understood that this work required patience and precision. Rented office space in a converted factory building. Exposed brick and timber beams that reflected the aesthetic of our work. Within 6 weeks we had 5 active projects and a waiting list. I wasn't trying to prove anything to Aiden. Not consciously. But I was proving something to myself. That I belonged in this field, that my work mattered, that I didn't need validation from someone who couldn't see my value. Marcus and I had coffee 3 times over those 2 months. Just coffee. Professional conversations that occasionally wandered into personal territory. He told me about a patient he'd lost, a young woman who'd come in after a car accident with injuries too severe to repair. I told him about a building that had collapsed during a previous restoration attempt, killing 2 workers because the contractor had ignored structural assessments. We understood each other's grief. The weight of responsibility when you hold fragile things in your hands. The 4th time we met at a cafe near my office, he asked if I'd like to have dinner again. An actual date this time. No pretending it's professional networking. I said yes. A week later, Aiden showed up at my office. I was reviewing blueprints for a theater restoration when my assistant buzzed me. We'd hired her 2 weeks earlier, a practical necessity as the firm grew. "Someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." I assumed it was a client. Maybe someone from the Whitmore project with a question. Instead, Aiden walked through my office door like he owned the space. He looked different. Thinner. His suit was expensive but rumpled like he'd been wearing it for too long. His hair needed cutting. But his expression was the same, that familiar mix of confidence and entitlement. "You've been ignoring my messages," he said. No greeting. No acknowledgement that he was walking into my place of business uninvited. I stood up slowly. Felt my entire body go rigid. "You need to leave." "Mia, I'm trying to apologize. I made a mistake at that lunch. But you're not exactly innocent here." He moved closer to my desk. "You always downplayed your work, made it sound insignificant. How was I supposed to take you seriously when you couldn't even talk about your projects with confidence?" The audacity took my breath away. I'd downplayed my work because he'd made me feel small for doing it. I'd minimized my accomplishments because every time I shared good news, he'd found a way to diminish it. I'd stopped talking about my successes because his subtle contempt had taught me that my achievements didn't matter in his world. And now he was standing in my office in the business I'd built after leaving him, blaming me for his perception. Making my response to his years of subtle cruelty into evidence of my inadequacy. "Get out," I said. My voice was cold, controlled. "If you show up here again, I'm calling security." He stared at me like I'd said something incomprehensible. "You're making a mistake, Mia. Women like you don't get many chances with men like me." There was again. That phrase. Women like you. Men like me. "Leave," I repeated. "Yow." He held my gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked out. I sat back down after the door closed. My hands were shaking. Not with fear. Not with shame. With rage. Pure, clarifying rage at the audacity of a man who'd publicly humiliated me, who'd spent 3 years undermining my confidence, who'd now shown up at my workplace to blame me for his behavior. My assistant knocked softly. "Are you okay? Should I have called security?" "I'm fine," I said. "But if that man shows up again, don't let him pass the front desk." She nodded and left. I sat there alone in my office, looking at the blueprints spread across my desk, at the framed photos on the wall showing completed restorations, at the business cards in their holder with my name and title. Mia Holloway, Principal Architect. Everything I'd built. Everything I was building. Aiden had no place in any of it. That evening, after Aiden left my office, I called Marcus. Didn't think about it. Just picked up my phone and dialed. "Hey," he said. I could hear hospital sounds in the background. Beeping monitors, distant voices. "Everything okay?" "Aiden showed up at my office today." Silence. Then, "Are you safe? Do you need me to come over?" The immediate concern in his voice made my throat tighten. "I'm fine." He left. But it rattled me more than I expected. "That's understandable. Want to talk about it?" We talked for 40 minutes. He was between surgeries, stealing time in a break room, and he just listened while I explained what had happened. The blame shifting. The audacity. The way Aiden had tried to make his cruelty into evidence of my inadequacy. "He's rewriting history," Marcus said finally. "Making himself the victim because you won't accept his version of events. Classic manipulation." "I know. I just can't believe he actually showed up. Like he has a right to demand my attention." "He doesn't. And you handled it perfectly. Set a boundary and enforced it. That takes strength." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the blueprints on my desk, thinking about boundaries and strength and the difference between the man who'd just left my office and the man I just talked to on the phone. 6 weeks later, the Historical Preservation Trust held their annual gala fundraiser. Black tie event at a restored 1920s ballroom downtown. One of those grand spaces with crystal chandeliers and marble columns and architectural details that made preservation architects weak in the knees. I'd consulted on the ballroom's restoration 3 years ago. Advised on chandelier restoration and floor refinishing. The trust had invited me to the gala every year since, but I'd always gone with Aiden, and the thought of going alone this year made my stomach twist with anxiety. Jordan called me 2 weeks before the event. "I'm flying in for the gala. Booked my ticket this morning. You're going and I'm making sure of it." "Jordan, I don't know if I..." "Nope. You're going. You're going to wear something fabulous and you're going to show everyone exactly who you are now. Not Aiden's diminished version. The real you. What if he's there? Then he gets to see you thriving." That's the best response to everything he said. He was right. I knew she was right. But anxiety still coiled in my chest at the thought of running into him. Marcus asked if I wanted company 3 days before the event. We were having dinner at a quiet restaurant near his brownstone. Our 5th date, though we'd stopped counting. "The Trust Gala," he said. "Would you like me to come with you? As your date?" "Officially." I hesitated. We'd been seeing each other casually for 2 months. Dinners, coffee, one afternoon spent walking through his renovation, pointing out original features. Long conversations that felt easy and comfortable. But we hadn't defined what we were doing. Hadn't put labels on it. "You don't have to," I said. "I know it's not your scene. I'd like to. If you want me there." Something in his tone, steady, genuine, with no pressure or expectation, made me decide. Yes. I'd like that. The night of the gala, my mother helped me pick out a dress. She'd driven in from her apartment an hour north. insisted on being part of the preparation. We stood in my bedroom looking at 3 options I'd laid out on the bed. "The green one," she said immediately, pointing to a deep emerald dress with clean lines and a subtle elegance. "It makes you look powerful." I tried it on. He was right. The color brought out my eyes and the cut was sophisticated without being overly formal. Marcus picked me up at 7. When I opened the door, his expression shifted. Something between surprise and appreciation. "You look incredible," he said. We drove to the ballroom together. Jordan was meeting us there. She texted that she was running late from the airport but would be there by 8. The ballroom was stunning. The chandeliers I'd helped restore cast warm light across the space. The original hardwood floors gleamed. Period-appropriate details everywhere. The kind of meticulous restoration work that most people wouldn't notice but that preservation specialists would appreciate deeply. I was greeting colleagues near the entrance. Patricia Whitman from the Trust, 2 architects I'd worked with on previous projects, when I saw him across the room. Aiden. Standing near the bar with a woman I didn't recognize. Younger, blonde, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to be anywhere else. Our eyes met across the ballroom. I felt Marcus tense beside me, felt his hand move protectively to the small of my back. Aiden started walking toward us. The woman trailed behind him, clearly reluctant. "Mia," he said when he reached us. His tone was falsely warm, like we were old friends running into each other. "I didn't expect to see you here." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "I consulted on this building's restoration. The Trust invited me." His smile tightened just slightly. "Of course. Your little building projects. Oh, even now. Even here." He couldn't help himself. Marcus stepped closer to me. The movement was subtle but deliberate. Aiden noticed immediately. "And who's this?" Aiden asked, his tone shifting to something calculating. "Dr. Marcus Reeves," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Trauma surgeon at Mass General." Aiden shook his hand, recognition flashing across his face. "The surgeon who was at Bistro Laurent. I remember you. You had some strong opinions about my relationship." "I had opinions about your behavior," Marcus said evenly. "Still do." The tension thickened. People nearby were starting to glance over, sensing something wrong. Aiden's date looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. I decided to end it before it escalated. "Enjoy your evening," I said, starting to turn away. Aiden grabbed my arm. Not hard. Not enough to hurt. But enough to stop me from leaving. Marcus moved instantly, his hand coming up. But I was faster. I pulled my arm free and looked at Aiden with cold, clear focus. "Yes, we are," I said quietly. "We're done talking. We've been done for 6 months." Aiden's face flushed. People were definitely watching now. The ballroom's noise level had dropped as conversations stuttered to silence around us. "You think you're better than me now?" His voice rose. "Because you got some press coverage and attention? You're still the same woman who worked on dusty old buildings while I was building a real career. You're still nobody special, Mia." Something inside me snapped. Not into pieces, into clarity. I'd spent 6 months processing what he'd done. Healing. Moving forward. Trying to let go of the anger and hurt. But here he was, at an event celebrating the exact work he'd spent 3 years diminishing, proving that he hadn't changed at all. Hadn't learned anything. Hadn't developed even a shred of self-awareness about his behavior. "You're right," I said. My voice was clear, steady, loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. "I am the same woman. The woman who spent 12 years becoming an expert in her field. The woman who leads multi-million-dollar restoration projects. The woman who preserves history for future generations so that buildings like this one," I gestured around the ballroom, "can stand for another century." The room had gone completely quiet now. "I was always that woman, Aiden. You just never respected me enough to see it. You were too busy measuring my worth by whether it impressed your colleagues. Whether it fit your narrow definition of success. Whether it made you look good." His mouth opened, but I kept going. "And you want to know the real difference between us? I build things that last. Things that matter. Things that will be here long after we're gone. You tear people down to make yourself feel important. I preserve beauty. You destroy it." Aiden's face had gone from flushed to pale. His date had actually backed away from him, creating physical distance. "A woman like me could never stand beside a man like you," I said, echoing his words from that terrible lunch 6 months ago. You were absolutely right about that. Thank God I finally figured it out. I turned and walked away. Marcus followed immediately, his hand on my back, guiding me through the crowd toward the balcony doors. We stepped outside into cool evening air. The balcony overlooked the building's garden, period-appropriate landscaping that had also been restored. City lights glittered in the distance. My hands were shaking. Adrenaline flooded my system, making everything feel sharp and hyperreal. That was spectacular, Marcus said quietly. I didn't plan it. My voice shook. I didn't mean to make a scene. I know. That's what made it perfect. He turned to face me fully. Are you okay? I just publicly confronted the man who'd humiliated me 6 months ago. Said everything I'd been too hurt and shocked to say on that restaurant patio. Done it without cruelty, without stooping to his level. Just clear, honest truth spoken loudly enough that everyone could hear. Yeah, I said, surprised by how true it felt. I think I really am okay. We stood there on the balcony for a while, watching the city lights, letting my heartbeat slow back to normal. Eventually Marcus spoke. I've been patient, like I promised. But I need to tell you something. I turned to look at him. I see you, Mia. I see your work, your dedication, your expertise. I see the woman who preserves beautiful things because she understands their value. The woman who just stood up for herself with more grace than most people could manage. He paused. And I'd like to be in your life. Really in your life. If you'll let me. I looked at him, really looked. Kind eyes. Genuine respect. No ulterior motives or hidden contempt. Just honest interest in who I actually was. I'd like that too, I said. He smiled. Reached out and took my hand. We stood there on that balcony looking at the city lights, and for the first time in months, everything felt exactly right. Jordan found us on the balcony 20 minutes later. She took one look at my face, then at Marcus holding my hand, and smiled. I missed the fireworks, didn't I? She said. Aiden showed up, I said. It got intense. Good. He needed to see what he lost. She looked at Marcus. And who you found? We stayed at the gala for another hour. Talked with colleagues, celebrated the trust's fundraising success, admired the restoration work that had brought the ballroom back to its original glory. But everything felt different now. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying weight I hadn't realized was there, and someone had finally lifted it off my shoulders. The next morning I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 emails. News of the confrontation had spread through preservation circles overnight. Apparently, several people had recorded parts of it on their phones. The videos were circulating on social media. Not viral exactly, but enough that people in the field were talking. Patricia Whitman from the Historical Preservation Trust called me directly. I wanted to check in after last night. Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm sorry if I caused problems for the trust. Problems? She laughed. Mia, our donation total from last night was 30% higher than last year. Turns out people appreciate watching someone stand up for themselves with that much grace and precision. You're getting calls, aren't you? He was right. The emails were from historical societies, preservation boards, architectural firms, museums. Everyone wanting to work with the architect who'd confronted her ex-boyfriend at a gala fundraiser and somehow made it feel like a masterclass in professional dignity. Within 2 months, Holloway Restoration Architecture had doubled its client list. We needed more staff, more office space, better project management systems. I hired a business manager, a woman named Claire who'd run operations for a construction firm and understood the unique challenges of restoration work. We hired 2 more architects, both women I'd mentored through earlier projects. Brought on a full-time historian to handle the research that went into every restoration. Expanded our office space to the entire 2nd floor of the factory building. 9 months after the gala, we won the contract to restore an entire historic district downtown. 15 buildings spanning 3 city blocks. A 3-year project worth more than $12 million. The kind of contract that transformed a successful small firm into something substantial. Something that would outlast me. The Whitmore Mansion had its official ribbon-cutting ceremony on a clear October afternoon. The mayor spoke about preservation and legacy and the importance of protecting history for future generations. Patricia Whitman talked about the restoration setting new standards for the field. Then they called me up to say a few words. My mother was in the audience. She'd driven down that morning, worn her best dress, the same one she'd worn to my graduate school graduation 7 years earlier. When the mayor mentioned my name, called me one of the region's foremost experts in historic restoration, I saw her squeeze her hands together in her lap. Pride quiet and fierce. Afterward, while people toured the mansion and admired the restored frescoes and period-accurate details, Mom found me standing in the library. "Your father would have been proud," she said. I stared at her. She never mentioned my father. Not in years. Not since the divorce was finalized when I was 6. "Mom, he left. He didn't care enough to stay." She nodded slowly. "I know. But you turned out remarkable anyway. That's all you, baby. That's all you. You didn't need him for any of this." Something in my chest cracked open. Not painfully. More like a door I'd kept closed finally swinging wide. "Thanks, Mom." He hugged me, brief, awkward, the way she always hugged. But real. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. We were at a restoration site in the Berkshires, an 1890s estate I'd been hired to assess. The owners were considering a full restoration, and I was walking through the property making notes on structural issues and historical features worth preserving. Marcus had driven up with me. Said he wanted to see me work, understand what I saw when I walked through these old buildings. We'd been together for 8 months by then. Not rushing, just letting things develop naturally. Late afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows in what used to be the music room. I'd been examining the windows for 10 minutes, explaining to Marcus how the glass had been hand-blown using techniques that didn't exist anymore, how each piece would need to be carefully conserved if we took on the project. "I love watching you work," he said. I looked over at him. He was standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun filtering through damaged windows. "You see things no one else sees," he continued. "Details and beauty that most people would miss completely. You make beautiful things last." He stepped closer. "I want to last with you." Then he pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and opened it. The ring was an antique. Art Deco setting, sapphires and diamonds in a geometric pattern. Probably from the 1920s. "Thought you'd appreciate something with history," he said. I laughed through sudden tears. "Yes. The answer is yes. I haven't actually asked yet. I don't care." "Yes." He slipped the ring on my finger. Perfect fit. His family welcomed me without reservation. His sister, the aerospace engineer, asked detailed questions about my work over dinner at his parents' house. Wanted to know about the engineering challenges of stabilizing old foundations, the physics of load-bearing walls in historic structures. His parents attended the ribbon cutting for my next major project, a theater restoration in Cambridge. His father, a retired civil engineer, spent an hour afterward asking technical questions about how we'd reinforce the balcony structure while preserving the original ironwork. "This is remarkable craftsmanship," he said, looking up at the restored ceiling. "You should be incredibly proud of what you've built." I was. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was proud of my work without any qualification or apology. Proud without the nagging voice in the back of my mind suggesting I should be doing something else, something more impressive, something that mattered more. This mattered. This was enough. I was enough. Through preservation circles, through the informal network that exists in any specialized field, I heard about Aidan's trajectory. He'd left his law firm. The official story was mutual parting of ways to pursue other opportunities. But whispers suggested conflicts with partners over his treatment of junior associates and support staff. A pattern of behavior that had become impossible to ignore after the gala incident. He joined a smaller firm. Taken a pay cut. Was trying to rebuild professional credibility he'd damaged through years of treating people as disposable if they didn't serve his ambitions. He was dating someone new. A woman who worked in his new firm's marketing department. Jordan saw them at a legal industry event and reported back. "She looks exhausted," Jordan said. "Like she's performing this role and it's killing her slowly." I felt genuine sadness for her. For any woman who'd have to learn what I'd learned. That some people only value you when your success reflects well on them. But I didn't feel satisfaction about Aidan's struggles. Didn't feel vindicated or pleased that his career had suffered. Mostly I felt nothing. He'd become irrelevant to my life. Just someone I used to know who'd taught me an expensive but valuable lesson about what I wouldn't tolerate. Margaret, the partner's wife from that terrible lunch, reached out one more time. We met for coffee and she told me something I hadn't known. After the gala confrontation, after the videos circulated and people started talking, several staff members from Aiden's old firm had come forward with complaints. Stories about his treatment of paralegals, junior associates, administrative assistants. A pattern of dismissiveness and contempt that went far beyond what he'd done to me. The incident at Bistro Laurent wasn't isolated, Margaret said. It was just the most public example. What you did at the gala, standing up to him that clearly, it gave other people courage to speak up about their own experiences. I didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't want to be responsible for his professional problems. But also recognized that he'd created those problems himself through years of treating people as less valuable than him. The wedding is in 11 days. We're getting married at a restored 1920s estate, one of my firm's completed projects. Small ceremony, fewer than 50 guests. Marcus's sister is officiating. My mother is walking me down the aisle. We're honeymooning in Italy for 2 weeks. Visiting architectural sites I've studied for years but never seen in person. The Duomo in Florence with Brunelleschi's dome. Palladio's villas in Vicenza. The ancient Roman ruins that still stand after 2,000 years. The business continues growing. We just won a contract to restore an 1880s opera house in Providence. My dream project. The kind of complex, beautiful restoration work that made me fall in love with this field in the first place. But the real measure of success isn't the contracts or the revenue or the recognition. It's waking up Monday morning genuinely excited about the work ahead. It's seeing a building I've restored and knowing it will stand for another century because of decisions I made. It's mentoring young architects who love this work the way I do, passing on knowledge the same way it was passed to me. It's finding a partner who values my competence instead of tolerating it. Who sees my expertise as an asset instead of something that needs explaining or apologizing for. Aiden's pointing finger still appears in my mind sometimes. Not often anymore, but occasionally. When I'm tired or stressed or doubting myself, I'll remember that moment on the restaurant patio. The shame. The humiliation. The horrible silence. But now when I think about it, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel gratitude. That moment of public humiliation was actually a moment of clarity. His contempt stripped away all the illusions I'd been maintaining about our relationship. His cruelty freed me to build something infinitely better. Sometimes the worst moments redirect you toward better things. Sometimes the people who publicly diminish you are actually showing you the exit door you were too afraid to walk through on your own. I walked through that door 7 months ago. On the other side was everything I'd been too busy appeasing someone else to build for myself. That's what real success looks like. Not someone else's approval or validation. Not proving your worth to people who refuse to recognize it. But having the courage to value yourself when others don't. Building a life with people who actually see you. Aiden was right about one thing. A woman like me could never stand beside a man like him. Thank God I finally figured out I didn't want to. If this story of finding strength after humiliation had you rooting for Mia, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she stood up at that gala and turned his cruel words right back at him with pure grace. What was your